Hello and welcome to On the Kerbs Pub Chat. I am one of your hosts, Thiemo Albers-Daly, and this time around I'm joined by motorsport journalist Amy Campbell. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. We've both survived Monday at time of recording, so that's about all we can ask for, I think. It's your first time on the podcast as well, and as you're into my international pub, first things first, what's your poison?
Oh, a desperado. I love a desperado.
Even more appropriate given it's a Monday when we're recording this, I feel.
Yeah.
On that incredibly positive note, which I'm sure, it's a nice drink as it is, but it just feels a little bit too on the nose for Monday. But we're going to just let you have it, and we'll get on with it. We'll get down to business because
Thank
this
you.
time we're going to be talking about how to choose which motorsport to follow. Because we were kind of talking about this the other day offline, and we've kind of got the similar interest of Formula One, which I think everyone kind of has, and then kind of just all branch off into our own other series here and there. It's kind of interesting to see why that is and what we chose and how we ended up there. So, I mean, I'm going to kick things off with the three motorsport series that I mainly watch, and then I'll throw it to you, and then we go into a bit of the reasons why, and we can kind of take things from there. So,
Sounds good.
Formula One, as obviously just mentioned there, that's going to be something for both of us. I think that's kind of, I keep now referring back to it as the gateway drug of motorsport. It's kind of your entry level, and you get there, and then you kind of find your way into the magical world of it. Then I've got the feeder series, so you've got your Formula 2, your Formula 3, your F1 Academy, and then for me, maybe a slightly left field choice, but Extreme E. I've watched that since it started a couple of years ago and just absolutely loved it. So those are kind of the main three for me, and we can get into the details why in a minute, but I'm intrigued what maybe your top three are.
Oh, that is such a hard question. I mean, three as well. That is so hard. I would have to say F1 because I kind of. Oh, I won't go into the details. You said we'll go to that in a minute. So F1, I think everyone loves F1. Oh my gosh, this is so hard. I would then say British Superbikes and
Mhm.
also World Superbikes.
See, this is
Yeah.
where it gets interesting already because, as you said, you've got the F1 is the interesting bit, and you've gone straight into the auto motorbikes. I've got that as something which is slightly different for later, which I can get back to. But I'm interested there. So Formula One, single seater, motorbikes, also single seater, but in a different way. So tell me why.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, why not? I mean, do you know what?
Well, there
Like,
we go.
I
Never mind. We'll move
always
on.
I just absolutely love bikes. Like I was always kind of a car person growing up, and then I kind of saw bike racing live, and there's a few other reasons why, but the main one was I saw British Superbikes last year, and I was just like, oh my god, I have just a different level of respect for people that race a bike. Like it's just insane. So
Was
that's
last
one
time
of
the
the reasons.
first time you saw the bikes live, or?
Yes, I think it was the first time I saw bikes live. Yeah.
And you were into it before then, or was it that kind of you kind of were around it, and then this was what really hit it home for you, or was it always something that you were into?
So I've kind of heard of World Superbikes before when I was younger. I did kind of watch like highlights on YouTube and stuff.
Yeah.
But I actually live in the same town as Carl Fogarty, who's like I think
Oh
he's a
yes, yes.
seven-time,
We
yeah,
all know Carl
seven-time world
Fogarty.
champion World Superbikes. So I kind of like heard about him. And my sister I think knew his daughter or something. So I
All
kind
right.
of heard about him, but I never really knew him. So yeah, I kind of saw it last year, and then it really got me into it, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm gripped now. I've now seen it live, so yeah, I love it.
It's similar for me in the feeder series thing. That kind of came during COVID though, because we all had a bit more
Mm.
time on our hands, and we were watching Formula One anyway. It was delayed, and then you started hearing stuff about kind of that was around the same time that Norris and Albon and all of them, they'd just come in the year before, I think, and there was much more emphasis on the feeder series there, and you're like, should I be watching this? Should I? I mean, you were aware of it, and you know that obviously people like Lewis have come from there and they did well there, but you kind of you do wonder about it. So I thought I'd check it out one day, and a little bit like you with the bikes, it was kind of once you started getting into that world, it's very hard to get out again, and you also don't really want to, and it just kind of
Yeah.
captivates you. And amusingly, Formula 2 and Formula 3, especially over the last year and a half, have been, in terms of entertainment, I'd say, have been better in racecraft and racing than Formula One has been for me, because there's just that level of unpredictability which we've just been lacking. It's a weird thing because, I mean, again, motorbikes for you. So is this the I virtually know nothing. My bullshit skills are not very good on this one, I'm afraid, and you'd be able to catch me up pretty quickly there. Are you? How much variety is there with the? Is there kind of Verstappen level domination? Is it a bit more of a free for all? What are we dealing with?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there is loads of different types of bike racing. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really know that until I kind of got into bikes because, like you were saying, like there's no bullshit radar. Like if you don't know bikes, you don't know bikes. But people are dead friendly and like tell you about it, so that's a good thing because I learned a lot of things through the people and like just going and chatting to people. But in British Superbikes, there's different classes, and obviously the Superbikes is the top one that you go to, and then you've got like ones underneath that. So it's all dependent on CC size, so an age range as well, because some classes are like different age ranges. But honestly, it's like there's just so many different things you can go to. Honestly, there's not enough time for me to explain like how many things you can go to. But yeah, I mean,
Separate
have you ever
podcast.
seen bikes before? Yeah, it's another podcast.
I've done a
But
bit
have you ever
like
seen
you
it?
did before in terms of another friend of mine got into it this year a bit more. Not as much as he'd maybe like to, but it kind of to the point where we thought, oh, I'll have a look at it to see what all the fuss is about, and sort of watched the odd YouTube highlights for races here or there. And there was a film, or what's it called? Hitting the Apex or something along those lines. It was a big
Oh, yeah.
MotoGP documentary film that I was kind of intrigued about. Um, that was quite interesting, but again, that's I've got a rudimentary knowledge. Rudimentary knowledge. We'll go with that. Hitting the Apex. That was the name of the film. There we go.
Right. I'm not seeing that. I'm not going to lie. So I'm a fake fan.
More of a fan than you. Who would have thought?
I know exactly. Calling me out now. Do you like to go to any bike racing events? Like, have you got anything planned, or have you not really thought about it?
I'm hoping you'd convince me, to be honest, because I'm thinking that
Oh,
that's more your kind of thing. I want to see if you can convince me to give it a second shot, because it's one that, if I'm skipping ahead a little bit here in the script, it didn't cut the mustard for me so much, and I'm intrigued as why it did for you. Because don't get me wrong, like you say, it's a whole other kind of different racing in the respect that you have for the drivers. It's insane, but when you see how close they are to literally the track surface, some of the crashes that they have, and some of the stuff that's happened over the years. I mean, the documentary mentioned that Hitting Apex, he covered, I think, a 5 year period, and so it very much hit every note in terms of they do have an awful lot of risk associated with them, and the racing is very close. You have kind of if you put those gaps between first, second, and third, say, into an F1 race, you'd be losing your mind every week, which is obviously what we want. But for some reason, it wasn't or hasn't yet kind of got that X factor, for a better phrase. And I'm intrigued to see if you could try and see if you could hit that nail on the head for me as to what was it. Was there any one thing about it? Like you say, you had that respect for the drivers, but was there anything else that was like, oh yes, this is what I really want with motorsport?
um, I think God, a lot of it as well. I feel like the type of racing, kind of what you touched on literally just before when you were saying like the gap between first, second, and third, and like all the way down the field, it changes all of the time, and it can be as simple as like somebody high sides into a corner, or somebody gets knocked off, or literally anything can happen, and it's kind of like that in cars with that F1 and everything like that. I mean, when I used to watch it when I was younger, like the racing was so much closer than what I feel it is now. Like I feel like after probably about 5 laps, it kind of can get a bit boring because the cars pull away, which, I still have respect for people that like work in F1 and everything because that is like pinnacle, like hard work. But I don't know, with the bike racing, like it's just so exciting. You can just never tell what a weekend's going to be like. Certain tracks might be an advantage to some riders more than the others. There's so many reasons why, and people are friendly as well. When you go down, they love showing you the bike, and any questions you have, they let you get on the bike, they let you like, do anything you kind of want, sort of thing. So I think when you go to them environments, like, people are very much more welcoming than I feel like the car scene. Because I experienced quite a lot of like different kind of car racing as well, from club racing to like British GT and stuff. And some people aren't as like, yeah, come in, look at the cars. Some people are a bit more secretive, which is, fair enough. But I like to get involved and have a look, and like look at the engineering side of it as well. That quite intrigues me. So, yeah, and I feel
Going to
like
go
when
off
you
one of
know,
your
like,
points there, and I think that that accessibility you're talking about there, I've noticed that myself in particular with Extreme being a small-ish paddock at best times because of the environmental reasons associated with the championship. They only allow a certain number of people at every event, but then that does
yeah,
kind of promote this open ability. I don't know if that's a word. I've invented a word. We'll go with it. This openness. That's a better word. That's an actual word. This openness with everyone, so that when you're there, all the drivers are just there, and you can go up to them. It doesn't feel like you have to go through two or three different people to get to the driver. You can just
yeah,
go up and talk to them. And the same with the garages. I found that when I was at one of the Extreme events, you can just walk in, have a look, talk to the engineers, talk to the scrutineering people, talk to the race representatives who've got to keep an eye on the car to make sure there's no tampering being done in Parc Ferme, all these kinds of things, and everyone's really open. And again, with Extreme and the feeder series in particular, they have this unpredictability to it, whereas F1, it has this pinnacle of motorsport label attached to it, which it definitely is. But I think because of that, and there's always this continuous strive for improvement, which I'm not saying that the others don't have that, but it doesn't seem to me that there is necessarily that prime focus, I think, if that
yeah,
makes sense. They're just
yeah,
there
absolutely.
to, we're here to make sure that everyone has a good time, we can put on a good show, and people can still run away with it. You see that in Extremely with Rosberg X Racing, or you see that in the feed series in particular. I think Felipe Drugovich in Formula 2 last year, Gabriel Bortoleto in Formula 3 this year. They were dominant, but you still had, and still do have throughout each season, that element of unpredictability. They're still close racing. It's a different kind of domination where, yes, these people are running away with the championship, but it wouldn't take too much for everyone else to catch up at the same time should anything go wrong for the people out front. Whereas I think
Mm.
Formula One, I think it maybe has that, and tell me if you disagree here, but it's maybe that for want of a better cliche, you never forget your first. And so go you can't really go back on it. You kind of got to stick with it. A friend of mine and I, we always say that we're married to Formula One, and then everything else you're window shopping, and you don't want to have an affair, but you're just looking around to see what else is available, but you can never really leave F1.
That is the funniest. That is the funniest like explanation I've ever heard about saying about
Does it
F1.
make sense though?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that is hilarious. Though I love that. Yeah, it's kind of true. I feel like, yeah. But do you know what I found like really interesting? Like, I went to F1 for the first time last year at Silverstone, and I was like so excited, so buzzing. And I'd only gone for qualifying day, so maybe it was because of that. I don't know. But I was really excited to watch, obviously F1, but like the feeder series, because like you were saying, there's so much competitive racing, and I feel like that doesn't get talked about the same. Um, but like I remember sitting in one of the grandstands. I think it was Woodcourt. I was sat in, and there was hardly anyone in the grandstand for like F2, F
Yeah, I
three,
always
and
I always wonder about that because you see it on the TV screens and the stands there, and like, why is no one coming to watch this? This is possibly going to be better
yeah,
than what you're coming for later.
literally it was. And like same with the Porsche Super Cup. Like I love following Porsche like racing and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the racing on it was absolutely amazing. I saw some really cool bits where I was sat. And then when it was F1, it was absolutely packed. There was not one seat free. But then as soon as like the other series came, there was so many seats free around me. And I was like, this is so strange. Like people are missing out on like really good racing, and it's quite sad.
it's a weird thing because if you I'm not going to be this mean and ask this question to you now. We might save this for another time. But if I'm asking you what maybe your top 10 races across any and every category are, if you combine them all and say, oh, this is my favorite from here, where would I rank that in amongst my favorite F1 races, yada yada yada. One of the
Mm.
highlights for me is I always go back to a fairly recent race. It was a Formula 3, I think, feature race last year in Hungary, just because there were mixed conditions, and just at the end, you had two or three drivers jumping into the pits and changing tyres at just the right time and clearing through the field in front of them. If you've got 30 cars, they're right at the back. They've got to catch up with last place, and they're tearing through them with like 4 laps to go to get the podium. And you're seeing everyone else just trying to survive, and it's this perfect balance of racing there. And
Mm.
don't get me wrong, the Grand Prix itself was entertaining enough. I mean, a little bit boring because of Max, but what can you do? Um, but I was like, I think my weekend's peaked already on a Sunday morning in terms of all the racing action,
Yeah.
and it's not even 9 o'clock in the morning yet. Um, so it's very curious thing, but it shows why you should, if you're a fan of F1, why you should give the feeder series a go. And it's kind of again, the last thing I'll say about this last question I'll ask for you on this bit is as someone who went into F1 first, were you always into bikes just generally beforehand and then just kind of went into it? Why did you go and watch them live? Because it's kind of I'm trying to see where the relationship goes because you go into F1, feeder series or IndyCar, I can understand it. Then maybe you think, ooh, off road looks cool, bikes is similar. I'm trying to see where your mindset was at for then like, oh, you jump from Formula One to bikes.
Okay, so I'm pretty much an open book when it comes to motorsport. It's like I was saying before, like I kind of always watched F1. But I don't live too far from Alton Park. I'm like 40 minutes away. And I kind of just decided, like, after COVID happened, I thought, do you know what? I want to go and see a lot more, like, racing live, like, loads of different stuff and just, like, experience new things and, like, see what's out there, sort of thing. Because obviously, I do, like, journalism and I want to, do social media and things like that for motorsports and stuff. So I thought, well, I want to see what's out there, sort of thing, because I've always heard there's great racing and stuff, and not everything's televised. So I'd literally just gone down to Alton Park and watched the British Super Bikes, and I'd watched loads of different stuff. I've watched British GT, touring cars, TCR UK. Honestly, I've got a list as long as my hand that like things I've watched over the year, like so many things. But
I tell you what, then
I
final
kind of
question on that one then. If you hadn't watched
one.
Formula One to begin with, do you think you would have done any of this?
Yeah, because my dad was kind of involved with stock car racing when he was my age. Like he had a friend who
Okay.
raced cars. He tells me the name and I forget it every single time, so I can't even tell you who it is. But it was somebody quite well known, I'm pretty sure. So I'm a bit of a
Really?
fake fan. But he used to do mechanics for him, and then my dad did some novice racing as well of stock cars. So he always used to bang on about it and stuff when like I was little, and I've just kind of got my love of motorsports through him, really. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's kind of where it stemmed from. So
Fair enough.
yeah,
I'm gonna take a bit of your point and roll on to the next question
yeah.
I've got for you. Then
Come
you
on.
can't have bikes because we've talked about this. I'm intrigued to see if there's anything else.
No.
What is the most recent motorsport series that you've tried out, picked up, and you've actually stuck with?
Oh. Um. Oh no, it's all been bikes. Let me have a think. What is your one? Tell me your one. Let me have a think of mine first.
That was the thing for me. For me, I got into IndyCar last year and didn't watch every race live. Watched mainly the highlights this year, but it was nice to have that balance between I could watch it live. There's 5 6 minute highlights, and then there's half-hour highlights if I want, and they're all kind of it's all there on YouTube if you want it. And I think when Ferrari started letting us down last year, it was nice to go over to a championship where anyone could win, and it wasn't going to be. It was kind of more the racing that we were promised from the new regulations of Formula One, but in a completely different category. Um, and you've had some familiar names there. You've got your Grosjeans, your Ericssons, your Lungars, and they're all kind of enough people there for you to be like, okay, I can have some skin in the game, but I'm not going to be too committed to them because I'm not super fans. and then the racing was just excellent. And then this year, Jamie Chadwick joined their junior series, Indy Next, and I was like, well, I'm definitely don't have the time to watch it live, but I will watch the highlights, and if I can get a chance, I will watch it live because I want to see how she gets on in amongst all of that. So those kind of went hand in hand and make sense from the F1 feeder series. I went native and went over to the Americans. But then the third one that I've picked up since it's more or less re-debuted last year, I would say, is Nitrocross, which you may know I also do a podcast for, so I've definitely got fully into that. And if you haven't watched that, maybe this is going to be what I try and convince you to watch out of everything, I think, because
Yeah, I'm ready to
if
hear
I'm going to
about it.
be if I'm going to be getting into or trying to get into the bikes on your end because you to see if it works, then I think you should try out Nitrocross because it is just rather insane. I mean, if you take the latest round that we had in Utah, you've got four categories essentially over a weekend. You've got your main billing at the top, your Group E, which are these electrified off-road cars, and the tracks that they go around, they could be a mixture of all different kind of surfaces, but they all got these gap jumps on there because it's Nitro Circus, it's your Travis Pastrana kind of thing, and you've got it's cars that fly and tracks that thrill is the tagline they've got, and it literally does what it says on the tin. So you've got all these kind of big name heavy hitters in this category. You've got these what kind of I'm trying to think what it's called a next category. I'm trying to think kind of maybe not necessarily like Citroen racing, but these kind of small hot hatches that they've amped up a bit in a support category. You've got these buggies that you'd normally have in off-road races as another sport category, and then something that they've had it twice now, and this is genuine van racing,
Oh
which
yeah.
essentially the commentary last time you'll appreciate because one of the commentary people went off to join the van racing because why wouldn't you? And his replacement was asking the other co-commentator, "Do you need any kind of like requirements to do this particular category racing?" And he goes, "Really, no." And it's literally just it. Whoever can turn up with a couple $100, I think, and a van of their own, they're willing to get it trashed a bit because you're going to be racing around, and it's just a really it's the ultimate fan engagement because you've just got people who you've got some drivers in there who actually just want to have a blow off a bit of steam, but then you've just got people who've been watching all weekend and going around just doing the insanely slow laps, but it's incredibly entertaining.
I love that. That sounds so cool. Van
And
racing.
yeah, you've got 2 days of that, and it's kind of just it's non-stop action because they've got really short races, 3, 4, 5 laps maximum, and it just keeps going and keeps going. And they've got this going back to what you were saying earlier with the bikes, this really open nature in the paddock of everyone can just walk in, talk to everyone, you can interact with everywhere. There's not really anywhere off limits, and even the rules, it not being an FIA championship, they can be a bit more flexible with their own rules. But it's nice that you see something and you're like, oh, this guy, there was a incident in the first round of the season, for example, a race was red flagged. A guy went back, he had to fix his car. There was no one around to help him, and you're like, oh, I hope he can get back in time. The race started, and he was literally coming around the corner to get onto the start finish straight. And you try that in F1, you're too late. You're gone. You try that in anything, pretty much you're gone. You're not going to be able to race. You're like, you were too late. Sorry, you missed the mark. They let him continue, and it was just nice to have that kind of camaraderie. Everyone wanted to see him succeed, and okay, he then went on to DNF, but it was the thought that counted. And it's
Yeah.
like imagine if he'd then won that race, how fun that would have been to go like, yeah, he was fixing car by himself, launched it through the start finish straight miles after everyone else had already gone, and he managed to come through and still managed to do all right in it. It's just there's that fun element to it, which I think other things don't have as much. And I realize I am talking a lot about Nitrocross now, so I'm going to let you just get a word in.
No, do you know what though? I actually agree with what you were saying about like the rules and everything. I feel like that's why I like bike racing so much. I will stop going on about bikes in a minute, but I think that's one of the reasons why I like it so much is because the rules aren't as like stringent. I mean, the team I'm working with at the minute, they did British Super Bikes last year. One of the classes called Super Stocks, And the rules were quite strict because obviously it's the top British bike racing, and then after you go, like you got British Superbikes, you go into World Superbikes. So because they've raced in something called NG Road Racing, this year it's a different championship and there's different rules, and you've got a lot more flexibility with your bike, and you can do certain things you probably couldn't in other like championships. So it makes it quite interesting. But I've just googled the nitro cross thing that you were on about, and it looks awesome. Love it. It's like almost like rally cars, but it's like kind
Yeah,
of not.
it's they've kind of taken elements from a bunch of other series and thought, what if we just slap that all together into one thing and let's just see
Yeah.
what happens? And it actually works pretty well. And it's like I was saying, you've got these drivers up the top and where you recognize some of these names, but everyone, it's never really a set grid. You've got your same few people. Um, but say, for example, like we had Chris Meek racing in the first round. He couldn't make it for whatever reason for the second round. So Tanner Faust came in and replaced him at the team.
Mm.
And we don't know if he's going to be there for the rest of the season or if he's just there for one round. But everyone's just interchangeable. Everyone can come in and just be like, yeah, I fancy a go at this. And if you're a young up and coming driver and you can only race in Utah, where they had the last round, then you come and join for that bit. And maybe you do well and you can get enough attention and support from new sponsors maybe, and you can continue on. If not, at least you had your chance there, and they're not going to be too fussed about it, and they're just nice and flexible. So it's it's a really nice open environment from what I've seen so far, and everyone's been really welcoming. So it's a fun world to have kind of discovered, and you do wonder if, going back to what we were saying earlier, if your dad say hadn't been involved with motorsport and you hadn't watched a little bit of F1 growing up, would you have found yourself where you are now, or were you always going to find your way there? It's an interesting thought
It is interesting. Who knows?
because you never,
Never know.
because you don't necessarily think you're going to jump from watching F1 and being like entranced by some stock cars that you're then going to go and be working with bikes and for a bike team and intrigued in all these other areas. It's not necessarily the leap that you're expecting to make.
No, absolutely not. Believe me, I didn't expect to make it because I never really was interested in like motorbikes on a road. Like I never really like was like, oh, I really want to be on a bike. Like I've never really kind of had that same like inkling. But like I don't know, just seeing it live just changed everything. And then I met the team and like hung out with them for a couple of rounds and then started working with them, and it was just like I love it. But when I googled a nitro cross, the buggy things that you were talking about before, the called Nitro RX or something like that.
Yeah,
I actually saw them at Autosport this year in January, and they were doing
yeah,
like a car display. It was so cool.
yeah. They had their opening round of the 22-23 season last year was at Linden Hill, and they were saying that they'd love to get, I mean, any part of these categories, but especially these buggies in Britain as more of a regular occurrence. It's more of a Scandinavian thing, an Eastern Europe thing. Um,
Right.
but I mean, they look. You can see from the look of them, they look so much fun to just drive in, and by motorsport standards, relatively cheap to get hold of and to maintain. So, and it's a really great way to learn racecraft for younger drivers. And it's this weird hierarchy that, so obviously, if you're an Indy Next, you go to IndyCar. If you're F3, you go F2, F1. With this, it's a bit different. It's okay, maybe not van racing is part of that, but you get in these buggies, and then when you do all right with them, you step up to the next class, which is here's a car to go around the shell that you've just been driving, and we're going to give you a lot of power and we're going to see how you do. And then we give you the supercar kind of thing, the electric power, but with this insane amount of energy that can come out of it, and you can go on the gap jumps and everything then. So it's this other kind of alternative feeder series route there, which again is just a nice bit of a twist on a classic setup, I think.
Mm, definitely. Very cool motorsports that you discovered there. I rate that a lot. I'm trying to think of the one. There's two
So you've still
that
not answered the question, really, have you? You've been
I
scrolling for
know.
time this entire time.
I'm, I'm getting around to it. I think IndyCar was probably one of the last ones I watched last year. Because when you were saying about Grosjean and Ericsson, and I kind of like remember seeing those names. I didn't watch a lot. I think I only watched a couple of rounds, but there was that I kind of stuck with, and then I say stuck with. I watched 2 rounds. I just said, but I had watched 2 rounds.
To be fair, the season
Um,
ends around August, September time, so depending when you jumped on, you didn't have much of a choice.
that's true. I could have jumped on at the end of the season. Um, and Formula E actually was probably the one last
Yes.
one I jumped on. I really enjoyed Formula E. Yeah.
Well, Formula E is an interesting one. I'm intrigued about your relationship with it because for me, I watched it from the very beginning, watched the first two
Oh.
and a bit seasons, I think, because I thought, okay, and how often do you come across, well, it turns out these days quite a bit because new motorsports, but back then, how often did you come across a brand new motorsport starting with the first time with a couple of names that you know from F1, a few other names that sound familiar as well, and single seater, it's electric, it's something new and a bit different. And then I'm not really sure what happened. I don't know if it was just because it kept changing channel in the UK and it was hard to keep track of, and or if life just got in the way. But then there was a good 3 to 5 years of, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I should have really watched it. And then last year, I think it was, I think I watched the tail end of 21, and then 22 and 23, I've watched the full seasons again. And it's been really nice to rediscover it because I don't think it ever lost the appeal, but it must have lost something in the process there for me to have dropped out of it for a while. But then coming back in, it was like, oh yeah, this is great. There's such close racing. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Berlin rounds this year, but those were quite insane amounts of racing going on there. With it was just an absolute mad free for all of close racing. Um, but it was nice to come back into it in a way, and it was weird because I don't think I've ever had that with any other motorsport where I started off loving it, left for some reason, then came back later to rediscover and question why I'd left it in the first place. So, what's your thing with Formula E?
I kind of discovered it. I think last year. I think was the year that I kind of like watched it properly. Because like you were saying, like the tail end of 21, I think I kind of caught on about then, and I kind of forgot about it because again the season ends quite early, doesn't it? Like it ends in July, is it?
By August time, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember like watching. I think it was the London round because that's the season finale, isn't it?
Has been, yeah.
Um, so I kind of watched that one and I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then when's the next one? And then I was like, oh, that's the last one. So
January.
I had I was disappointed. I was like, no. So I had to wait till last year to start it properly again. And I kind of just, yeah, like I think with all the I'm trying to think of the right word, like environmental sustainability and things like that, I feel like it's really good for that because obviously don't have the same emissions that like F1 or any other kind of cars would have. So I feel like it's definitely a good direction for positive change, but I feel like it doesn't get that same hype as what other motorsports might do because obviously it doesn't sound like anything. I don't know if that's why a lot of
It's
people
yeah, it's a
sounds.
weird one because if you treat it on the closeness of the racing, the quality of the racing, and all of that, it's incredible. But
Mm,
I think and no disrespect to the drivers, but they don't have a Lewis Hamilton or a Fernando Alonso or someone of that ilk there. They've got very good drivers, but they've never been able to poach one of these drivers into there in that kind of
yeah.
same way, I don't feel like. And it's got all the right elements to it, but it just, I don't know, it doesn't get the attention it deserves, I don't feel like. And I'm not entirely sure why that is either. It's an intriguing prospect in the same way that, say, um, the feeder series don't get enough attention. They're very
Mm.
popular, but if you ask someone if you watch like ask a new F1 fan, oh, do you watch this and this, they might not even be aware that it's there. And it's like, but it's on the same weekend. It's on the same, like if you've got F2 or F3, it's on at the same time. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Or Formula E is like, oh, is that just like a watered down version of F1? I was like, not really. I mean, okay, it's not as powerful, but it's still very impressive in its own right. And I don't know why it gets kind of left to one side.
No, I must admit I don't know either because I feel like it is really good, but I feel like as well with F1, I think maybe kind of the marketing slash merch slash TV like
Yeah, it's got the
coverage is a
history, I suppose, to it, and as well as kind of it's a
yeah.
juggernaut for a reason.
Yeah, but then saying that though as well, like you were saying earlier on about Lewis Hamilton like coming up through the series, like all good like not good drivers. That sounds really bad. Like there isn't a lot of good drivers. All the drivers that are in F1 or like all the legends have like come from somewhere. So it's kind of like I don't know. I think F1 is just televised a lot more, and it's got more merchandise, more. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a curious one with Formula E because, like you say, it's got all of the elements that a lot of other motorsport has to be successful, and yet it's missing that element to it that Formula One has. And I don't know if with Formula One it's because it's maybe it's just because it's Formula One, and you just can't compete with that. And you can go through a season like this year where it looks like Red Bull are going to win every single race, and yet a lot of people are not going to be bored with it, and they'll keep coming back next year. Whereas if you did that in a different category, oof, it would be tricky to retain people, I think, and it's a weird one, but does open up an interesting question, which is you and I now between us have tried out a bunch of different motorsports, and we've definitely got our preferences, but I'm intrigued about which ones didn't cut the mustard for you and why.
Oh, now you might be quite surprised by this one, but I would say my first one was MotoGP.
That is
Um,
interesting because I have that on my list as well.
you actually
I do.
right? Okay, so I'll give my reason. I'm intrigued to hear yours, but for me, I feel like I don't know. It just hasn't gripped me the same. I don't know what it is, but it just hasn't gripped me. The other motors have. Like watching Jake Dixon get his first win, honestly, I was jumping off that sofa. But I just, yeah,
See, for me, as a
MotoGP.
bit of a novice to all this motorbiking malarkey, it seems to me that but it's all bikes. Why are you not excited by more bikes with, like, in my head, bigger drivers? It's like you're saying, and not necessarily wrongly in this case, but it's like saying, "Oh, I much prefer Formula E to Formula One." I mean, you can, but there are questions raised about why.
Oh, I think a lot of it's like bike politics as well. Like, I feel like what's going on behind the scenes is probably I don't know what's putting me off. Like this, is, I don't know. I can't even explain it to you. But like
This is making
I
for a
don't even.
riveting podcast. We don't know why we think any of these things. We just do. Enjoy everybody
I,
listening to this. We don't know why we think these things. Maybe you can tell us in the comments, but we don't have a damn clue.
yeah, exactly. It just isn't gripping me the same. The other motors are, but just MotoGP isn't. I feel like I'm maybe just bored of the same things and it needs shaking up somehow. But I don't know what needs shaking up.
Well,
Don't know
we'll come
what.
back to that point in a minute because that does leave me with another question that I want to ask you. But for me,
Oh,
MotoGP, it was the same thing. It was in terms of I can appreciate the closeness of the racing, the fact that once I know who everyone is, I can understand why they are such big names in their sport. But it just didn't hit me the same way that even though, and maybe it's just I think I don't know if it's a like if I refer back to the marriage with F1 earlier, I don't know if it's part of the marriage or if it's Stockholm syndrome at this point. Who knows? But it feels like when you get to the start of an F1 race, even this year, every time, even though I'm pretty much guaranteed to know that it's going to probably be Max winning, I do think, what if it isn't though? Something could happen.
yeah.
And I still love that kind of uncertainty of it. Whereas MotoGP, literally anything could happen, as we've seen, and yet for some reason it doesn't have the same effect on me. And I don't quite get that. And the other one I had on my list was World Rallycross. I got the chance to watch a full weekend of that for free. I won a competition for once in my life, and they gave me a
Yeah.
full weekend access pass to watch all of it. And I thought, perfect. I've always been intrigued about this, but there wasn't a free trial or anything, so I thought, let's take a look, see what all the fuss is about. And I think I just watched it wrong. And by that, I mean, I'd already been introduced to the world of Nitrocross at this point. And I feel like if I'd watched World Rallycross and then Nitrocross, I would have enjoyed World Rallycross a lot more. But because I'd watched Nitrocross first, it was this kind of, it's clearly been inspired by World Rallycross, and then they've taken their own ideas and added them to it, and it's made it a lot better, in my opinion. was World Rallycross. For me, for the race that I watched, and then from following little bits here and there, it was essentially here's four people and Johan Kristoffersen, and Johan Kristoffersen's going to beat all of them in every single race. And if he doesn't, he'll come second, and it still won't matter because he'll win the final race at the end of the day, and then he'll take a championship, and that's it. And
Yeah.
it's a little bit difficult as a new person coming into that to think, I'm clearly going to root for Clara Anderson here because there's a new driver that I know from Extreme E. They've come to World Rallycross. That'd be fun, and she's a great driver. But it's going to be difficult when you're coming up against someone like Johan Kristoffersen, and it's tricky because at least in F1 generally, there's a couple of other heavy hitters around that could spoil the party. Even if they don't all the time, you know that there's always that chance. Whereas there, it seemed immediately like, no, this is his championship, and these other drivers are just there to take part and have a nice time as well. And you're like, I find it difficult to get behind that. And when you have that extra thing of you've got to pay to watch it as well, and it's again, you've got to pay to watch most things these days, which fair enough, but when you're having to pick and choose between everything, and it really matters which one you start, like which race or which round is your first introduction to a sport, because if they don't knock it out the park, then what is there to make you stay, which leads me to an interesting question I want to ask you, which maybe we can apply to MotoGP and a couple of these other categories that we do watch and follow a bit more is what does a new motorsport series need to attract new fans, and what does an older, more established series need to attract new fans and keep them?
Oh my gosh.
I know I'm being mean to you.
Oh, do you have an answer? Because if you do, then you go for it. Because I feel like I need a minute to think about that. That's a hard
I've got a little
question.
bit of something because I was I got struck by a little bit of potential inspiration yesterday. It's all kind of
Oh,
not necessarily specifics, but it's characteristics, I think, because I was thinking about the ones that I'd got into. So take your IndyCar, your Indy Next, Extreme E, and Nitrocross is the four here that kind of convinced me of this. Um, Especially Nitrocross, I think, because it's this more kind of rugged left field category where they're trying to make it with the big boys, but not playing them at their own rules, kind of thing. They're showing that there's another way of doing things. And I think essentially for me, a new motorsport series in particular, it needs heart, it needs character, it needs engagement, reliability, and escapism. I think if you can get all of those on there, because the heart, it comes across in the presentation a lot of the time. The character, you get that with the drivers, engagement. Who else lets their fans go van racing? That's all I say there. Relatability, I think a lot of the time you see this in Formula One as well. You see this with various drivers where if you were at Silverstone last year, you're there because of Lewis and George and Lando. You've got that kind of British drivers on British soil. Let's see if we can make something happen. And you've got that escapism, which you just have generally in motorsport because most people don't get to do it. And I think another element of it is that it needs to be relatively simple and straightforward so that it's easy to follow, but also relatively flexible. Again, Extreme E, when that was starting, it's changed a fair bit to what it looks like now, but they're always willing to compromise and change things and try new things out. So that it can adapt and change, especially, like I was saying, in those early years when it's still figuring itself out. Less can be and is more. And I think it does need to balance that seriousness because people have paid to watch it and a lot of work's gone into creating it for it to then not matter would be silly. But in terms of presentation, it needs to have that self-awareness, that passion and creative freedom to not be limited by the governing body that runs the sport, which I think is a problem that Formula One is struggling with a bit these days. You see that very much in the broadcasting side of things, at least for me. You could tell me if you disagree, but I think a prime example of that is in the UK. We have two options, which is we can watch Sky Sports live, or we can watch Channel 4 highlights. Have you? Which
mm,
ones of those do you watch, or is there one that you haven't watched? Just so I can make my kind
what?
of point a little further here.
Do you mean like I've watched it on Channel 4 and Sky Sports?
Yeah,
Yeah, I've watched it on both because like Sky Sports is so expensive. Oh my gosh. So for a while I couldn't afford because I would only watch F1. I was like, oh no, I can't afford to get just Sky Sports for F1. But I've
Mm.
watched Channel 4. Um I'm gonna be real brutally honest here, and I don't mean it in a horrible way, but I prefer the presenters on Channel 4 than I do Sky Sports. I really
You know
do.
what? You know what I'm going to say to that, Amy.
Do you agree?
100% agree.
Hey.
I love how
Yeah.
we try and create controversy in this podcast, and yet we agree, and somehow it's all fine. After that, we're going to have to make people angry in the comments instead. But no, I take the point though, because I think it's one of those things where Sky Sports feels more like they've got to toe the party line with Formula One, whereas Channel
Yeah.
4, they they still do that to an extent, but they have that more creative freedom. They always had that. I feel like the BBC had that when they were doing ITV had it before them, and Channel 4 did and still does have that. And whenever it's the Silverstone Grand Prix, I always make sure I can watch that on Channel 4 live because I'm like, yes,
Mhm.
finally, it's back on proper TV. I don't have to be fussing about. Can watch it, and it's got all of these elements that I was saying about earlier. It's got the presenters; they've all got their own little bits of character. They're all engaging. That's relatable. There's heart there, and they don't try and overcomplicate anything. The features are good, but they're not like it's not that the Sky presenters aren't or are trying to like be above everyone else in a sense, but it just they don't seem as relatable to me, I don't think. And it was quite amusing because after Hamilton's move on Perez and Leclerc last year, I remember seeing on social media all this through goes Hamilton stuff, and I was like, what the hell is all this? I have no idea. And I didn't realize that it was from commentary from Sky Sports because I was watching the Channel 4 and I was having much more of a fun time doing that. Um, and I mean, I don't know if you noticed if you caught this on the highlights for Baku in 2021, but Mark Webber's scream. Do you know about that?
No, I don't know about that.
Well, you and anyone listening to this who hasn't seen and heard this, go back onto YouTube, just type in Mark Webber commentary screaming Baku. It is brilliant. As it's at the race restart after Verstappen's crashed out, and it's when Lewis goes straight on as to and he misses the corner. And Mark Webber, the sound that comes out of him, you've never heard something more unnatural in your life come out of a racing driver. It's and again, it's kind of you never get that on Sky Sports. It just feels a bit more corporate, whereas Channel 4 feels just more fun and more engaging. And I think that's key to keeping audiences. And when you have Sky Sports being um, exported out to all these other countries where they don't have much choice in the matter of what they get, it can be a bit disheartening. And maybe that's why there are lower numbers in some countries because they don't have that flexibility that they could have otherwise. But I'm gonna circle it back to you then. So there's the presentation is a big part of it, as we've just kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent and talking about there. But aside from the presentation, which other points do you think that both new and old series need? I mean, I feel like the flexibility is a key part there. Would you agree or disagree?
I would definitely agree with that. I feel like as well, um, maybe people might not agree with this, but I definitely think affordability in terms of pricing,
Mm.
in terms of like ticketing and also merch, because and same with like food and drinks, at circuits. I know that's something not related to new motorsports in a sense, but I feel like the affordability of being able to go is 100% something that needs to be considered because again like all the different club racing I've gone to obviously the prices fluctuate like World Super Bikes which goes around the world and it comes to Donington Park once a year. I think it's about £48 for the Sunday, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you compare it to like F1 and stuff, it's I mean
I'll
not
say I
even
wasn't
like
thinking that was a lot of money when I was already thinking about some of the prices that you have to pay just to watch F1, never mind watch it live at a track for a Friday.
Exactly. I'm well, exactly that. You pay that on a Friday. So for me, like I feel like I would rather just pay something like that than spending like so much. But that's one of the reasons why I didn't go to F1 this year was because of how much it costs just to go on the Sunday. And I just flat out refuse to pay that sort of money when it's like I could sit at home and watch it. I know it's not the same and I sound like a real fake fan there, but like if you just can't afford it, you can't afford it, can you really? So I feel like that needs to be considered when it's like
Well, and I think that's
F1.
another interesting point that you raised there. Even if you go and watch it live trackside, there's no
Mm.
guarantee that you know everything that's going on anyway, because depending on where
I'll
you are,
see.
they may not have a screen up so you can see the rest of the circuit. Like if you can't get say it's on Sky Sports, you have a big screen up near the stands that you can see the rest of the race going on. Because otherwise, you're just waiting to see what happens, and you've just got to put the rest of the pieces together in your head, hoping that it makes sense, and then you find out properly what happened afterward because you only can see these few corners where you're sitting.
Exactly. That literally just led me on to my next point with like the whole TV and like having more coverage and things like that. Like, especially if it's like a lower class, like club racing and stuff like that, they don't have like any streaming on YouTube. Like, there's a couple that are on YouTube. Bike racing there isn't really, but cars there are some like YouTube coverage and stuff. But I feel like that would be massive. Like if they had more like streaming online and things like that, because not everyone can make every single round, especially if it's up and down the country. Like, not everyone can make all the rounds. So I feel like having something like that, like online streaming, would be a really good one. Like even on Facebook, like
Mm.
Facebook live stream or something. I feel like that would be very cool.
Like you say, you're paying all this money to be there, plus any food or drink, plus any transport, and maybe you have hospitality as well because you're traveling up to see it and you can't just go in a day. It adds up pretty
Yeah,
quickly, and you've got to get pretty ruthless with what you decide you can watch
yeah,
trackside and what you can watch at home. We've got the price side of it, we've got the presentation side of it, the flexibility side of it in terms of the rules. I'm intrigued here. The final point I kind of want to make on this is we don't mind when new series are a bit more flexible with changing things up because they're still figuring themselves out. We've seen this with Formula E, Extreme E, I've seen it in Nitrocross already. Um, but then with things like Formula One, and we've seen it in MotoGP this year or last year, I think, they've tried to make changes, but not necessarily for the right reasons. And I'm thinking in particular sprint weekends and these alternative qualifying sessions that we're getting. And it's interesting. I want to get your thoughts on it. Does it feel more like they're trying to be more flexible to get new fans in, or does it feel like they're trying to manufacture entertainment rather than let it just play out
I
naturally?
mm, I think they're trying to manufacture entertainment. I'm not gonna lie. I don't see the point of a sprint qualifying, and I also think, like I've said this ever since they started sprint qualifying, I feel like they've done it so wrongly because it's so confusing. Because I don't know if I'm gonna get this right. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but is it Friday they have free practice one, and then they have sprint qualifying or something like that, and then Saturday it's free.
Friday, I think is they have practice, then qualifying for Sunday's Grand Prix. Then
Yeah, that's
Saturday
it.
they might get a practice session. Then it's straight into sprint
And then it's sprint
qualifying, and
qualifying.
then the sprint race, and then Sunday is the main Grand Prix.
So
Which for
I
me, I will
feel
say the one benefit to that has been that I'd now just skip Fridays and Saturdays completely and watch the highlights on Channel 4 in the evening because it's a lot easier and I enjoy myself a lot more than with the whole weekend because I get to skip all the stuff live that I don't really care too much about and the sprint's all done in about half an hour. So it's perfect.
yeah. I mean, it is quick, like entertainment, I suppose, in a sense. But I feel like it's such a weird setup because then when they do the qualifying on the Friday, I always forget that qualifying on the Friday is for the Sunday and it's not for the
Mm.
Saturday's qualifying is for the. That just confuses me. I don't know why, but it just confuses me, and I feel like it's kind of. I don't see much point in it personally, but that's just my opinion. But what do you think? I'm intrigued to hear what you.
I I never saw anything wrong with qualifying as it was. I liked the idea of, I mean, we saw the mess that they made of qualifying back in 2016 when they tried that alternative format at the Australian Grand Prix and ditched it immediately. And I thought, good, you've learned. Don't try something, don't try and fix something that isn't broken, leave it. And then they came and did this, and we're like, why? And I don't think that, I think if the regulations were working a bit better in terms of you haven't got an unseen level of domination that you've never seen in your 70 plus years of your sport, then it would be potentially better. But for me, I think they've just got there's ways of switching things up and trying to maybe manufacture entertainment. But if you look at the feeder series I was saying earlier, Formula 2, Formula 3, they've got the perfect setup already. Just do qualifying on a Friday, fine, and then reverse the top 10. Have that for Saturday's
Yeah,
sprint race, and then you go off and do your normal thing on Sunday as you would per normal. leave a sprint quality out of it, nothing benefiting from there. You're just losing out on practice time. And okay, maybe Max would still win if he gets on pole and he's in P10, but you've got a slightly more mixed up thing there. And it potentially, heck, if you wanted to take a prediction, you could reverse the entire grid for the sprint race, and you're offering less points anyway. And if your Lewis's, your Fernando's, your Max's are as good as they appear to be, then it's not going to matter where they start. They're still going to be able to get through the entire pack anyway by the time of the end of the sprint race, and you've got more of an entertaining race out of it because they've actually had to fight for it and can't get off into the distance. So I feel like I feel like the interesting thing that I'll maybe just stop making my points on there in a second is the fact that it's interesting how when it's a younger motorsport series, you're like, okay, fair enough, figure yourself out, you do you. I don't mind you changing a few things here or there. But after a certain point, and I'm not quite sure where that cutoff point is, but F1 definitely has it, is why are you changing this? There's nothing wrong with it. Leave it alone. And you're just trying to alter things now and make things more interesting without it just if it needs that, then surely there's something more fundamentally wrong with it. And it's interesting where that line is drawn, where it's okay, you figure yourself out, or no, leave it.
Mm. Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel like everyone's going to have different opinions. So I feel like it depends how long you've been watching the sport as well. Because if you've been watching it for like, say, a few years since like COVID and stuff and things like that, then maybe people might think, oh yeah, there's nothing like kind of like wrong with it, or I don't know. Like it's everyone's got different preferences on racing, but I agree with the whole grid flipping situation. Like it really makes things interesting. They do that in like British Super Bikes and British GT as well, car racing and stuff. And it's so interesting because then that way you really get to see if these people that are getting podiums and stuff are actually because they are good at what they do, or if it's just because they got lucky with qualifying or something like that. Like it makes it really interesting, and different people win and different people get like opportunities. And I feel like that's probably what's lacking in F1 is the fact that we all can predict who's going to win.
Okay, final point then before we wrap. We're attempting to determine what does a motorsport series need to capture a new fan? How do you choose which motorsport series to follow? Do you have any advice after all of this?
I would always say start at the lower club racing. So like I don't know if you're thinking of going to F1. Well, see, if you're going to F1, you would see F3, wouldn't you, and everything like that. Oh, saying that actually though, I take that all back because in the British GT they've got a support series called I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's GB2 and GB. No, it's not GB2, GB3 and GB4, and it's
Yes, I
basically
know these.
single. Yeah, so you could see something like that, and it's like a fraction of the price, and it's kind of introducing you to cars and single seaters, because obviously they have loads of different support series. So I don't know. I would suggest somebody go to something like that, and then instead of spending all that money on F1 and then thinking, oh, actually, I don't really know if you know it's for me or something. At least you've not spent so much money. But if you watch like the GB3 and stuff, and you think, oh, I actually quite like single seater, then I would say go for that. Is that like the sort of answer you were looking for, or not
I don't know what
really?
answer I'm looking for. I'm just kind of intrigued to see what you'd say, to be honest. I was trying to think of what I would maybe say in that situation, which would maybe be something similar along your lines, but also maybe see if you're unlike you've possibly if you're interested, then there's possibly a friend who's also interested. Maybe try and
Yeah.
figure out together if you wanted to go and watch something live or have a watch party and find a sport where you don't have to pay a lot of money, if any, to watch it, regardless if that's trackside or on TV or online or wherever. And just kind of don't be deterred by, say, you watch Formula One and you despise it immediately. Don't then think you're gonna not enjoy IndyCar, or then you try Extreme E or you try MotoGP. But just think, do a little bit like what we did when we were over the last couple of years. Of like, I've never had the time to really go and explore these other series properly. Now I do for whatever reason. Let's try a little bit of everything and just see what I like at this motorsport buffet. And I think automatically after I think the more motorsport series you try out, the more of an idea you'll get. Whereas if you just limit yourself to two or three, you could easily go off the whole lot of it. before even trying most of it, and you might miss out on something you really enjoy. And I think just being open, like you say, to just trying things out will work, because that's how you got into the bikes last year a good bit, and that's how I got into Nitrocross. I think we found a relatively positive note to end the podcast on, which it was looking touch and go for a minute there. So I'm glad we managed to circle it back around to something. We'll leave it there before we've run amok again and we go on ground. But that is all we've got time for in this edition of On the Kerbs Pub Chat. If you want more from Amy and I, details for where you can find the pair of us will be in the description of this episode. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and on socials, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Amy, in the meantime, shall we go and grab another pint?
Absolutely. Let's do it.